So there's this like duality that exists in all of life. And we encounter this duality in all of creation. And when you look at, the different aspects of things, there's always two. So everything comes in twos, everything operates in twos. It's a balance of this and of that. So there's always a balance going on in the expression and experience of things. And this became really clear to me a few days ago when I was having a conversation with Aja, and I started to receive some insight about this duality and how there is, source or God, and then there is us, and that we are kind of points from a different spectrum, but also we represent this dynamic throughout the universe. So I'm going to show you a few things that might help you understand this per se. Like when you look at, for example, the yin yang symbol, you have the light and then you have the darkness. And the light represents one aspect, one side, one, form of expression, of experience of creation, of God. And then you have the darkness, you have the lack thereof, or the idea that there is a lack thereof. And it's simply the idea of what if, or what. When God was in all its glory, when God was everything and all things and nothing but everything and all things, there was a desire to know itself. This thing it had a desire to know of itself, but it couldn't experience of itself from its point of perspective because it was all things. And so what was created at that point, that was the point of creation. That was the beginning, the expression and the expansion of the universe of all things. There was a thought, a simple thought. What would it be like if, or what if this were the reality and not this? What if I wasn't? And it was just a simple concept within the mind of God, per se. What would it be like to have this experience or that experience? Just the opposite of what was. And so in this moment where all that was asking what it would be like to not be or to not, it immediately created this duality, this light and the dark, the what we call as good and evil, which there really isn't good and evil, but it's the light and the dark and this or that. So this duality was created, and this duality began to allow for all potentials to be met, for all things to be in its furthest form of expression, in its furthest form of expansion. So all things began to exist, and we became a part of that process. We as individuals, as people, as individuated perspective, became a part of that process. So I'm Fernie. I am a personality, an individual, a separate being, right, from all things. But that's a lie. I am not separate from all things. I am one with all things. The only thing that keeps me separate is the belief or the idea or the construct that I am separate, thereby allowing me to experience aspects and things in a way that would help me to continue to individuate. So I am designed to be exactly who I'm designed to be in this life. And that's what I say to you all, is that you're designed to be exactly who you're designed to be. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. The good things, the bad things, the happiness, the sad times, all of it was created and designed to be. And you are the perfect person to go through this experience, to know this and that, to feel this and that, to feel the highest of yourselves and the lowest of yourself. Like, you are designed to have that full form expression. So you're here serving your purpose. A lot of people ask me, what is my purpose? Our purpose is simply to exist, to be. There was a calling for a point of perspective to be understood. And so immediately, as that point of perspective was desired to be, you came into being, you existed in that moment because you are that unique point of perspective. And there are so many perspectives, right? So that's what the universe is, God is. It's basically a collection or conglomerate of all of these perspectives in various forms and features and aspects and things and mixes. So it's infinite. And so that's why we look at the infinity symbol And we're like, wow, like this is an ongoing forever process. Like, the desire to be and not to be was the basis of reality, was the basis of creation. And then the desire to be and to be not that, but to be this was the kind of fueling of that continuous process. It's just so interesting to know these things. And so when you look at the infinity, and I was talking to a client a few days ago, where the infinity symbol represents the way that we engage with God, the way that we exist with God. Because if you look at the infinity symbol, it's like one big 8. At the top part of that 8, or the top part of it, that is the expression, that is the form, that is the awareness of self as God. So that you would call that source energy, right? So then in order for us to exist, that form must become transformed, transmuted, and condensed into a different form temporarily, or just in a conceptual way, so that it can begin to, blossom, move forward in its own right. So if you kind of go down that trail, that brings us to the bottom of the 8. The bottom of the 8 is us. So we are the bottom of that point. And so when you look at the entire thing, we are constantly fueling the energy and the expansion of the universe, of God. There's every time we experience something, every time we think something, every time we are something, or we experience the lack thereof, it creates an opportunity to express or to expand in all directions. And so when we are having our experience, there's all these expansion points, all these points of perspective that have immediately begun to become a part of the awareness of God, of the universe. So you look at all of it, and it's got that circle there. And then that brings into being these coalescing points. What I would say is the conglomerate, or the absorption of all information, all feedback, it's almost like a feedback loop. It's all of it's coming back. And as it comes back, it begins to, become a part of source, or source begins to reabsorb that, and it begins to create more expansion, more opportunity for growth outwards. Because the moment you ask, what would this be like? There's an explosion in so many different directions in the infinite. And all of those perspectives, all of those points are experienced, they're explored through consciousness. So, and then, as source, or as the universe, as God begins to, reconnect, or to kind of realign itself with us in furtherance of this process, then you have a condensing of that energy, because that is such a massive energy. That's huge energy. And it's not just spatially. We're not talking about spatially. We're talking about just, it's beyond our current perspective to completely embody. And so, but it's huge. And so that God energy must condense itself and begin to kind of refine itself in a way where it begins to just focus on being one thing. And you look at this, it brings us to that bottom part of that 8 coming back down. And we call that channeled energy. And so channeled energy is just any energy that we are basically being fed and fueled by. So, when you are waking up in the morning and you decide to make a different breakfast that day and you experiment, that was a condensing moment. That was you channeling source energy. When I am connecting with a client and I'm doing a mediumship session, that's condensing, that's channeled energy. So that's me channeling that energy. When someone has a new idea or concept, that's channeling energy. When someone feels the need to expand in a new way, or to be something else, that's channel energy. So there's a lot of channeling energy that is coming through all of us. We are all constantly receiving that larger intuitive, that larger informative form of information, that source of information, which is source energy. So we're constantly getting that. And then it comes back to this point, to this very refined point of perspective, which is us as a human being. And then we feel back, we have those feedback loops. So that's essentially what's going on with that infinity symbol. And it is infinite because it's an ongoing forever process that never stops. It began from the moment of the beginning, and then it will continue on, because there will really be no moment where it can end. So it's almost just that moment of consciousness. So, but for us to be able to connect with our higher selves, for us to be able to connect, like for example, I connect to Aja. For me to be able to connect with Aja, I must begin to expand beyond my current point of perspective and reach higher, reach into a phase of myself, into a point of perspective that is more encompassing, that is more of source. So I basically have to realize that I am divine, I am God, I am the universe, I am source, and expand myself into that awareness, into that consciousness. It's what we all do. This is why, Jesus used to talk about this. Yeshua used to tell people, like, you are God, you are God. We are all children of God. So, I mean, it's the same thing. We are all part of the great being. And all of that information, all of that knowledge, all of that is available to us. The only difference and the only thing that keeps us from accessing and utilizing that is by our idea that we are separate, the idea that we are not that, the idea that we are limited, the idea that, well, I've never experienced anything like that, so it's not possible. It's these ideas. And so the moment that you open up your mind and open up to the potential, you immediately begin to expand into that potential. And so when I want to connect with my higher self, with Aja, with Source, I expand into that point of perspective, into that reality. Now, there are limitations, yes, because I'm not designed to be all that is in this form, right? I can't be that in this form. This form is very constricted. It's almost like trying to force a bird into a small crab shell. Like, you can't do it because it's too big. It's not designed to be that way. So what we do and what I do to connect to my higher self is I have created a bridge point, or I've accessed a bridge point, and my bridge point is Aja. And if you look at the picture that I drew, you see the image of an Ankh. It's an Egyptian Ankh. It's an old symbol. It represents a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But for me, when I was creating this image, I kept seeing that infinity symbol, and I was sensing and feeling that. And then they basically guided me into the image of an Ankh, the Egyptian Ankh. And so if you look at it, it kind of matches in and fits in with that whole infinity sign or symbol on the top. But then there's a line that goes in the middle, and then it goes straight down to the point of consciousness. And so for us, whenever we want to acknowledge, whenever we want to expand, and whenever we want to reconnect with our higher selves as source, as God, we can't just do it on our own, because we're not designed that way. We're limited perspectives, and we only have limited ability in this being, in this form to being construction. So we need a bridge point, the halfway point that will help us to kind of connect to our higher selves. And what most of us tend to do, and what has been going on from the beginning of time, is that we create archetypes, or we create points of higher beingness that help us to make that leap, that help us to make that connection there. So like for an archetype, it's just a representation for a being or a type of energy. And so for here, we have, channeled energy. For me, it's Aja. So Aja is my bridge. Aja is my ability to connect with infinite and with source energy. For others, it might be mythical figureheads. This is where, you think about a lot of the stories. There's a whole generation of kids that believe that Thor is a real person, or that Thor is a real being. And so because of this, Thor is a real being in that perspective. And so even though it's just a character on a bunch of movies and all this other stuff, or Tony Stark or whatever, because I've never seen those movies, but those movies, these are mythical beings, and they represent a higher beingness to ourselves as people. They represent a higher beingness in some way or another. And so they become a bridge for some people to connect and access to the higher levels of being. Of course, it's all based on the energy or the personality or the character's limitations, because those limitations become also our limitations. So for me, when I think of Aja, I think Aja is unlimited. And so I get to experience and have experiences that are associated with that unlimited beingness through my connection with Aja. And so you've got the mythical figures as well. You've got extraordinary phenomena. Sometimes people will have extraordinary or supernatural experiences, like when you think of the miracle of Fatima, where those three children, they saw this being just pop out of nowhere, and she called herself the Virgin Mary, and she was there to help them and to guide them. That's a supernatural experience and a supernatural being, but that is still a bridge point. It's an opportunity for us as our individuated selves, personalities, to connect to a higher beingness that represents the source. And usually we run to the things that are most familiar for us. Again, going back to, some people use angels, who's my archangel, or there's an archangel, or archangels are the highest beings. Like, they create created this to be this bridge point. Same thing with spirit guides. Same thing, people call it a higher self. These are all bridge points to the source or to that which is God. So, people use religions, different religious figures, Muhammad, Buddha, etc. These are all bridge points. That doesn't mean that they weren't real people or they did not exist in our reality, but we're still using them as bridge points. They're opportunity to access and to get up to the next level. The Catholic Church knew this from the very beginning because that's what they used priests as. They had, we didn't have a direct relationship with God, so we had to go to the priest who was an authority for us. And then, of course, the priests had their own authority, but it was the system of authority, how there's a higher authority or a higher beingness than us. And so the only way to connect to source, because we have this belief or this concept that we're not worthy or we lack value or we can't be all that is, that's still a belief, but it is a bridge point, and it keeps us at a specific level of beingness. And so in order to connect with a higher beingness, we needed something to be a go-between. And in the Catholic Church, we used to use the priest. The priest was the authority before God. Same thing, they had their own bishops who were the authorities before God. Then they had the Pope. Again, it's a system of authority that is put into place there. So we have these bridge points, and that's essentially a very consistent approach to connecting to God. Is like when you don't know how to connect directly to God, when you don't know how to connect directly to source energy, you identify, you create some sort of bridge point. Most people will use religion. Some people use mythical characters or stories or figureheads, etc. But it's all the same thing because it allows us that connectivity, that ability to bond and to go up to that next level. So us, bridge point, God or the universe or source. And when you look at all these channels and these people who are channeling, I'm channeling the Pleiades and I'm channeling, this other person and I'm channeling, Ramtha. You have all these people, these psychics and these sensitives who are channeling these higher beings, but they are all the same thing. They're all the bridge points. And the bridge points are based around our own life's experiences, what we prefer, what we're used to, what we identify with, what we're feeling connected to. They're all the same thing. And then above that is source energy or God. So you've got all these channels who have so many different characters and names and, beings and personalities and etc. And you're just like, God, how do you know what channel is actually true or who is actually channeling what? By the way, that little whistle sound that you're hearing, that's the hummingbird. We have hummingbirds coming around now. Those are all forms of higher beingness. And you have all these mediums and channels who are like, I'm channeling this person and that person. I'm channeling, St. Francis of Assisi. I'm channeling St. Germain. I'm channeling Metatron or whatever. So you've got all these people who are supposedly channeling all these beings. And it's like, who do you know what's real and what's not? And what I tell people is it's all real, but it's not because we're real, we're real, but this is all still a lie. This is a just constructed form from source energy coming to you as Fernie. So it's really not a real thing, but it is because I'm experiencing it as a real thing. And so these channels are connecting with higher forms of energy and expression. And as they connect with those higher energies, they begin to either invent or create, whether they know it or not. They may not, most people don't know it, but they begin to create and identify with or have preferences that bring and coalesce that energy into a bridge point for them. And then that bridge point is their connection to source or to God. A lot of people, the Akashic Records this, Akashic Records that. The Akashic Records are not a physical thing. There was a library in history that was known as the Akasha, but this existed in a different region of our world, our planet. And it was a library that, was way much more profound than like the Library of Alexandria. That was the Lighthouse of Alexandria. The Library of, there's another library. But anyways, it was way more profound, and it was known as the Akasha, which was a special place where they kept records or stuff like that. And over time and in history, people just started to identify that with this like God's library and all that other stuff. But it was just a representation someone used when they were making trying to help people connect the dots. And it's the same thing with the Akasha Records. There is no actual Akasha Records, but there is for people who use it as a bridge point because that's their way of accessing that higher knowledge. So you don't need the bridge points. And this is why Jesus walked around and was telling everybody, Yeshua was walking around telling everybody, like, don't worship idols. Don't don't focus or become obsessed with idols, because you basically keep yourself from God when you do that. And what do? We ended up creating religions over idols and specific figures in our history. And, even Jesus, we turned Yahshua into an idol, and we use that as a bridge point to access our higher beingness, our source energy. And that's what we were warned against by Yeshua. It was like, don't use idols because they're going to keep you from accessing source energy. Of course, we twisted and turned it into, don't worship idols. They're not the true God. No one else, nothing else matters. Nothing else is the true God. My God is the true God. We turned it and twisted it into something evil and bad, but it wasn't. It was originally something very enlightened perspective and enlightened awareness. And so that's what my image is here. So you've seen it on my page. You're like, what the hell is he drawing? What is this? That's what this is. This is a combination of both the infinity symbol and also the Egyptian Ankh, and what those representations are as well. I just got done right before I got into the video. I just got done with a regression session with my hypnotherapist, and we were going through some childhood stuff. And what I was told, and which is interesting, which is I'm going to now start to explore this idea and concept, is that we always think of the bridge point or that higher authority as something positive, or something that's supposed to be like like from the positive perspective, like an angel or this or that. But we also have bridge points that are negative experiences or negative forms of experience in our lifetimes, and we don't realize it. And so as a spiritual person, and as I've evolved over time, I've come to understand that all the things that we've gone through in our lives that are painful for us, or that are, difficult and challenging, many times those people that we encountered, they are our greatest teachers, because they help to teach us certain things we wouldn't get any other way. And, a teacher isn't just someone who's in front of a classroom teaching you the material from a book. A teacher is also someone that is offering you an experience or an opportunity to have an experience that you would not have any other way. And in the hypnosis session that I was in, we were dealing with some issues around my stepfather, who was extremely abusive, and he hated my guts. He didn't like me for various reasons, but I was, this child who he just had complete authority over, and he basically use that to his advantage and caused a lot of pain and suffering for not only myself, but also for my mother. And what I came to understand in my hypnosis session, and as I was coming out of it, when I was talking to her, is that is also a bridge point. Because as we were coming out of the hypnosis session, she was like, okay, before you exit, before you come out, see a symbol or think of a symbol that represents what this will be for you. And I was like, okay. And the first thing that I saw was the Egyptian Ankh. And the only thing that I could think of is, oh my God, that's very similar to right now. I've been, I just drew a picture of that 2 nights ago. How interesting that this is coming up again during this hypnosis session. And then it was explained to me, we think of just the positive experiences as a bridge point, but it's also negative experiences are a bridge point as well. They're both parts of the same thing, parts of the same spectrum. You're learning and gaining through this experience, but there's different ways to do it. And so my stepfather, who was very abusive and who, put me through a lot, I realized coming out of this was that, oh my God, like he would, before he came into our lives, I didn't know the experience of anger or rage or power or manipulation or that sense of authority, that male dominating authority energy. I didn't know any of that. And then once he came into the picture, through very specific and various experiences, I got to experience every one of those things through his expression of it. And during, all of that, it was very painful, and I suffered through a lot to just have those experiences. And then growing up, I thought, it just made me a tough person. It made me strong, and I can get through anything. And I thought it was just about that. And it turns out, no, like those emotions, those human emotions are not one-sided. It's a spectrum. And there are those who use those human emotions and those human forms of expression to do great things with, to create and not to destroy, to come from a place of love and not from a place of fear. That's why, you have a lot of women who are very powerful who just people hate them. They hate their guts because they're too outspoken, or, they're not acting like a woman should, and she's not in her place. And all of these just low vibe ideas and perspectives on a powerful woman, a woman who's a fucking badass, who can really like wield the power and the force around her to do great things. And so there's a lot of inconsistency with how power is bad and having, a control is bad, and all these things that say these experiences and these human aspects are bad, but they're not. Many great things have been done with people who used and wielded those types of our human experience and expression and emotions as a positive thing. Steve Jobs, probably a dick, right? Probably a dick. But at the same time, look what he did. He heralded in a new period in our evolution where we now use computers for whatever reason, whether you think he got the technology from aliens or you think he created the technology himself, whatever. But he used his human form to do these great things with that we will see as great things. No one's going to go back and say, Steve Jobs ruined the world by creating the iPad or creating the iPhone, because you're probably watching an iPhone or an iPad or some sort of smartphone that is based around some of his concepts and designs, or just him implementing and putting that out there. So we've benefited from this, and we are now more connected than ever because of that device, because of what was created, and that fed off of the internet, which is, again, another big creation as well. But you have a lot of people who are able to embody these vibrations, these states of human perspective in a way where they use it for good, and they're not destroying, they're not causing pain and suffering, they're not, abusing others with it. They're actually doing good things with it. So it really is a choice, and it comes down to it. When you are in that moment of full human form, do you choose to do great things with it, or do good things, happy things, loving things, compassionate things with it? Or will you choose to dominate, to control, to pain, to create fear, to manipulate, etc.? Who will you be? Because we have the choice every single day, and we have that choice in lots of opportunities throughout our lives as humans where we can be one or the other. And for him, he chose to be one way with it. But I became familiar with these emotions. I became familiar with these different human experiences and expressions and whatnot. And because I'm so familiar now with it, because it repeated itself, a lot of these patterns repeated itself over my life, because I'm so familiar with it, I understand the feeling of control. I understand the feeling of I can manipulate this situation and that situation. I can understand authority, but I choose not to do awful things with that. I choose not to be an awful person with that. I think when I was back at Starbucks and I was a store manager for many years, I was in a position of authority, of power and whatnot. Yeah, I made mistakes. Who doesn't make mistakes as they continue to evolve? But if you ask the people that worked for me, I would assume, I would hope that a majority of them, because I've heard it from them myself, majority of them would say that I was an amazing manager. I was an amazing person to run that show, and that I really did care about them. So there was a lot there. And, I feel like that was a good thing to do, because what if they grew up with people or with family members who were awful, who were just, nasty people, and who were in positions of authority and took advantage of that? And what if I was the first authority figure in that person's life that gave them a sense of, yeah, but you can also care for the person that you have in your life. You can also do something good for these people. So I would say that has benefited me, because I learned some things. I used it in a different way, and I had these experiences with these people, and they may have gained from that as well as I gained from what the experience was for me. So interesting. But your bridge point, that also being another bridge point, because even though it's not a chosen or preferred way to connect with Source, it was my way of experiencing that midway point between that and Source, because Source is the awareness and the connection with all things. And that was a lesson through a bridge point. Even though he may have, as a person, he may have vibrated and had a lower vibe and lower energy from a place of fear and all this other stuff, from the place of not being, which is, the opposite of what we are, which is being. But maybe he was based of that. It doesn't matter, because whatever he did still brought me up to the level of that connection with Source through the bridge point. So, all right, guys, I hope this has helped you guys understand some deeper concepts here, and I will talk to you next time. Okay, bye-bye.